probably safe to say that Dune Part 2 was at or near the top of a lot of people's most anticipated movies this year. I would count myself among those folks. So was it the epic mic dropper we were hoping for? Well, let's talk about it. Part 2 picks up pretty much where Part 1 left off, with Paul and his mother and the small group of Fremen people making their way back to their home. Without going into heavy spoilers, the main story continues that of the first movie, with some of the Fremen people believing that Paul is their chosen one, with some others not necessarily buying into all the fanaticism. So, Paul must prove to them begrudgingly that he is their savior who is going to lead them to paradise. At the same time, he's building a relationship with the Fremen girl Chani. We get to meet the Emperor this time around and get some more details on why he decided to betray House Atreides in Part 1. And eventually everything comes to a head between the Fremens and the Harkonnens and the Emperor. That's all I'm pretty much going to say in regards to the story and the plot, though, just to keep spoilers to a minimum. Now let's discuss the things I liked in this movie. And there was a lot to like. First and foremost, the visuals and the audio in this movie were like one gigantic suck it to the whole science fiction genre. It was that impressive. A lot of the visuals were done practically with real locations and props and such, and it gives the movie just this level of immersion that we do not often get. The things they pulled off with the sandworms alone were flat out amazing to see. 75% of this movie takes place on the planet Arrakis, which is just one big desert. This place is nightmare fuel for Anakin Skywalker. So to keep this thing visually engaging is a feat in itself. At one point we get to visit the Harkonnen homeworld Gedi Prime, which has a black sun. They do this very cool effect there where anywhere the sunlight touches there's this absence of color, but an extremely high contrast. It looked like a bizarro version of what our own black lights would do. It was a very neat looking effect that gave the planet its own feel, gave it its own identity. The world building and the lore of this universe is also very top notch. The first movie had hinted that the Fremen would be a very formidable opponent out in the desert. And in Part 2 here, we get to see that play out with more authority. I loved all the ways the Fremen used the sand to their advantage, like hiding right underneath the surface to ambush the Harkonnen, who were more dependent on technology and brute force tactics. The sound effects for their long-range rifles and the guns on the Thopters were both excellent. We get to see more examples of the Fremen's extreme moisture preservation methods, some of which are kind of gross, but you gotta do what you gotta do. I thought Hans Zimmer's score of this movie was well done and was at its best in the darker moments of the film that were meant to build tension and dread. It properly enhanced any emotions that we were meant to feel, as a good score should. The actors' performances that stood out to me were Timothée Chalamet as Paul and Rebecca Ferguson as his mother, Lady Jessica. Now, neither one of them blew my socks off in the first film, but now I understand why they were cast here. In Part 2 here, we get to see a different side of these characters. Let's just call it a more sinister side. And I thought both of them pulled it off really well, especially for Lady Jessica. There were some shots in this movie where she wasn't talking, but the look on her face was so convincingly menacing. And I was just sold. She won me over. They both won me over. But now let's talk about some things in the movie that I thought were not so good. And let's just stick with the actors here first. Honestly, I thought the weak link here was Christopher Walken. Not that he had a lot of screen time or anything, but I guess I had some preconceived notions on what I expected of the Emperor, and he was pretty far from what I had in mind. Maybe it was an odd casting choice, maybe it was on me and my expectations, but either way, it just did not click for me. Austin Butler as Feyd-Rautha also left me a little bit underwhelmed. The gravelly voice he tried to use really stood out to me, like he was trying to do an impression of Christian Bale's Batman anytime he was on the screen. The Baron, played by Stellan Skarsgård, talks in this same manner, but I thought he did it better. It just sounded way more natural coming from him. Florence Pugh, I thought she was alright. She wasn't really given much to do in this one, but I imagine she's going to be pretty prominent in the next movie. Zendaya, I also thought was kind of middle of the road. She didn't wow me in this movie, but she didn't really let me down either. For a movie that's flirting with a 3-hour runtime, I thought it moved along at a decent pace. Personally, I never felt like it was dragging its feet at any point, but I did find the ending a bit jarring. Again. It still felt like this was just a piece of a larger puzzle, which we know that it definitely is, but I can't help but look at the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which also had one big overarching story, but each individual film did a good job of capturing its own self-contained story that felt complete. And I just don't feel that with the Dune movies so far. It feels like a lack of closure to me. I left the theater feeling a bit hollow, or unfulfilled is probably a better word. Not everyone will feel this way, of course, but I certainly did. So in conclusion, even though it had some blemishes on its otherwise amazing presentation, I did think it was a great movie, and it really blossomed from the seeds that were planted in part 1. Just maybe not the mic drop movie I was hoping for. With all that being said, director Denis Villeneuve really has set the stage here for an epic part 3 that I can't wait to experience. If you've seen the movie, please get down in the comment section and give me your thoughts. Did this movie blow your mind? Were you disappointed? Let us know. Well, that is all I got for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. And until next time, my friends, I am out of here.